If you book the wrong Italian wedding venue, it can affect almost every aspect of your planning and way more than you'd think. Let me tell you more. Ciao, I'm Lucy, wedding planner and founder of Lista. I'm here each week with advice for couples planning their Italian wedding. I want you to have a really good time planning your wedding. After all, you only do it once. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel below or leave me a comment and let me know how this video helped you. So today I'm going to talk about the 5 most important questions or areas to ask your venue or any venue that you're considering booking for your Italian wedding. Now, booking your venue is a huge process. It can be quite overwhelming, and that's why on Lista.com we've got a whole directory of venues that are completely vetted by us. They're all beautiful and they work logistically and practically as really good wedding venues. So the 5 most important areas to quiz your potential wedding venues are: number 1, the rules and regulations that they have. Now, often when you go and look at a venue or when you ask for information, you're just supplied quite minimal information like accommodation, costs and things like that. But almost always behind that is another layer of rules and regulations. Venues will all do things differently, which can be frustrating and time consuming, but most venues will not share these rules and regulations unless they're asked for them. So always ask. Examples of some of the rules that venues might have would be things like, do they have a maximum capacity for guests? Do they have music rules? Do they have rules around the spaces that you can use on your wedding day? Do they have restrictions as to what suppliers you can bring in and when you can bring them in? Do they have to come in at a certain time and have packed up by a certain time? Are you allowed external guests on your wedding venue site on other days around your wedding? Is there a cost to that? Are they able to use the swimming pool? There's also a whole other area around suppliers, what they can do, when they can work, and if there's any extra things they need. So for example, some caterers might not be able to use the kitchen. Some venues have rules around only certain caterers can use their internal kitchen, and some caterers have to bring their own tent. This brings you a whole other host of costs. If you want the full list of questions, we've got a download on Lista.com. It's called the Venue Ticklist, and it goes through every single thing I've just talked about and more. The second most important thing to identify is obviously the cost of the venue. And as I mentioned before, this goes beyond just the cost of accommodation. Accommodation might be seasonal, so through the different points in the year, you might have different lengths of time that you have to or can rent a location. The cost may also change depending on the seasonality of the year. Then there might be other costs, things like extra cleaning, linen, and those other types of things I mentioned, like fees for bringing in certain suppliers, fees for having certain guests on site. Make sure you get those really clear before you sign anything. And never ever hand over any sort of deposit or payment until you have a signed contract back. The third most important thing is identifying how many people can actually stay at the venue. This is also an area that can be unclear. Some venues will say that it can sleep 35 people, but actually 10 of those people are on sofa beds or extra beds that they bring in. It's really important to identify some sort of map of the venue and understand how many beds are real beds and in what rooms they are in. It's also really important to understand the configuration of beds. Some will be doubles, some can be broken into twins. This all helps you work out who's going to stay where, and ultimately how many people can stay in your venue will determine how much budget you get back and contribute back to the costs of your wedding. The fourth area is, where are your other guests going to stay? So if your venue doesn't have enough accommodation for all of your guests, then we need to know that really nearby all of your other guests can be easily and comfortably accommodated. So simply, you could ask the venue if they have recommendations, but often they won't send these until you've actually booked the venue. They're very busy and they don't have a lot of time. So simply do a Google search. If you pop the venue in and you search for villas, hotels, borgos, that kind of thing, you'll soon and quickly get a good idea of what's in the area. It's a really good idea to pick the accommodation and suggest it to your guests so that you can have some sort of control over the transport. If your guests stay all over the place and you have to provide transport here, there and everywhere, obviously in Italy it's often quite remote, even in places that are seen as not very remote. So your transport has a long way to go, and if it's got to go to a lot of different places, not only will it cost you more, it will be a bad experience for your guests. Some of them will be on a bus for a really long time, and that's no fun for anyone. And finally, the fifth most important thing is getting that contract really clear. So venues have all types of different contracts. You see some that are just a one-pager with very basic information and a quick signature. You see others that are 10 pages long and have clearly been put together by lawyers. It's up to you how detailed you want to get with your contract, but I would heavily suggest that it has at least these things in it. Your liabilities, so by signing the contract, what you are responsible for. Often that's going to be the actual accommodation that you're taking, looking after that, potentially paying a deposit for the safekeeping of their venue, and the costs that you're going to pay for the wedding. I'm getting boring now, but once again, those costs should be absolutely everything that you're committing to, and anything that's not included in this contract should not be paid by yourselves. That isn't a foolproof way of making sure that you have no further costs down the line. It's best to have this conversation early and get them in that contract, because if they come up later, they're going to add stress and they're also going to add some sort of ambiguity over things. Ultimately, the venue have the power, it is their venue, and you want to make sure that you're super clear up front what all those costs are going to be. You want a payment plan really clear, so you need to know when and what you're going to pay. And you need to think about other eventualities. Obviously, COVID has taught us that having clauses around postponements, cancellations, and all of those sorts of eventualities are really clear. Hopefully this will not be needed and won't happen again, but it's really good to understand that so that if it did, you know exactly where you are. So that's it. They're the 5 top things to ask your venues when you're looking for prospective Italian wedding venues. There's quite a lot more that I'd like to add to that, and if you download our venue Ticklist on lalista.com, it will tell you all of the other information that I'd recommend you have. You'll find the link in the comments below. And don't forget, we've got a community over on Facebook with hundreds and hundreds of couples in there having conversations all the time. Lots of them have already picked their venue, some are going through the process now, and we see them having lovely conversations and supporting each other to make the right choice for their venue. So definitely check that out if you're on your Italian wedding planning journey. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next Wednesday.